Yeah, that would be great. I'm going to go over some of the house rules once we get started.
While we're waiting, was this a complicated build out with Microsoft directly? This is like a complicated build out.
A lot of this was hand tailored for the eventathon. I know that they were working on a lot of the specific details with us through building this environment.
Fascinating.
Let's see, are we still missing Dr. Brody and Dr. Hansen here, I believe? Okay. There's Dr. Brody. Hello, Dr. Brody. Hello, Dr. Brody. Hello, Dr. Hansen. Nice for you to join us. Let's see. I think we'll just wait a few more moments for a few more participants to enter the room before we get started. Everyone's hard at work on their pitches.
Elizabeth, hi, this is Ilan. One question, is this going to be like more like a formal forum, or is kind of question and answer from our part?
So this is going to be more of a organic process for all of the participants to be able to ask questions of our fabulous panel here. So I guess we'll still have a few people coming in slowly, but I can go ahead and get started here and walk everybody through how this is going to go. So first, just hello, OHSU Inventathon hackers. I'm so glad that you guys could make it with us today. I'm really excited to moderate the Early Disease Detection Expert Q&A panel here today. We have an incredible group of experts with us today to answer your questions. And we hope that in addition to getting some of your own questions answered, that you'll be able to glean some really important take-homes from some of the questions asked by other hackers here in the session. So first, I'm going to go over some of the ground rules and how this session will flow. So in order for just the ease of facilitating the questions, if you could submit your questions in the chat. When submitting the question, please identify what team you're on. And then there's a limited amount of time. We were hoping, and I was thinking there'd be lots of people coming into this meeting. So I was really wanting to distribute the questions from different teams. So obviously, if we have not as many people, then definitely we'll be able to ask multiple questions. And then also to just try to limit your questions to single topics at a time and not asking, 16-part questions all at once. And then after this, I'm going to go through, I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. And if the panelists could then just give a brief answer to why innovation in early disease detection is important to you and your work. We'll kick it off with that. And then from there, you can start posting your questions in the chat and I will direct those to the panelists. And if all of the participants could also remind to mute yourselves. And with that, we'll get started. First, we have here with us is Dave Ribble, who you may recall from his and Kirsten Emmons' fantastic workshop earlier today. He has served for the past 9 years as the Director of Innovation for Hillrom, which is a leading global medical technology company with over 10,000 employees worldwide. He received his BS from University of Washington in political science and a law degree from Willamette University. And he is currently responsible for identifying, investigating, and executing growth opportunities at the intersection of clinical needs and emergent technologies. So Dave, if you would like to step in.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the invite. On our team and with Hillrom, we're often thinking about disease detection in a couple of areas. First, moving disease detection or diagnosis into new care settings. A good example is diabetic retinopathy, realizing that a key need in diagnosing diabetic retinopathy was the challenge of patient compliance, that patients weren't going to optometrists for diagnosis. And so by finding a technology that allowed that diagnosis to be initially done in a primary care physician's office rather than an optometrist addressed a real need. So we're working on a number of areas where early disease diagnosis, especially in settings where it's not been possible before, is an important driver.
Great, thank you so much. Next, I have Patty White. She is the CEO of Hemex Healthcare. She received an MBA from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and a BA in Finance and International Business from the University of Washington. She started out as a pioneer in personal computers and then moved to medical devices, where she's commercialized medical technology, established global distribution channels, created strategic partnerships, and built new companies. She served as the CEO, the Chief Commercial Officer, CMO, VP of Marketing and VP of Business Development, and has led several medical startups and spurred growth in large companies. She's developed and marketed products in cardiology, pain medicine, orthopedics, patient monitoring, ophthalmology, optometry, health services, population management, and healthcare information. We are so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Hey, hi everybody, and I'm really happy to be here. It seems like this is a really exciting event, and can't wait to see what happens. You know, my real focus the last 25 years, I've worked in medical technology, but really mostly been a serial entrepreneur, as Liz described. And really, I think as an entrepreneur, and doing things in the disease area, you're really driven towards doing something that's going to have a huge impact. And when my co-founder and I started Hemix about 4.5 years ago, we said, look, we're going to focus in an area where we can change the lives for potentially millions of people. So our whole criteria on trying to identify what technologies we were going to work on was really around impact and early disease detection. So it's exactly what we're talking about in this panel. And at Hemix, we have developed technology that we have a 1-minute test for malaria that's more sensitive than existing tests. And we also have an 8-minute test for sickle cell disease, which is a great example where 99% of the children that have sickle cell disease or born with it are identified in the developed world. And most of the kids that actually have sickle cell disease live in the developing world. So 75% of them are in Africa, and the majority of those children die by their 5th birthday because they are not diagnosed. So I think that's my headline is, early diagnosis can save lives. And that's really what we're passionate about. And that's why we founded Hemix Health.
Thank you so much for sharing that passion with us. Let's see, next on our list, we have Dr. Jonathan Brody. He is the vice chair of research for the Department of Surgery here at OHSU. He is also the associate director of translational research at the Brendan Kulser Pancreatic Center for Patient Care. He was a member and co-leader of the GI Cancer Program at the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center at Thomas Jefferson University. He received his PhD from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. His thesis specialized in studying the molecular aspects of cancer and cancer genetics. He patented with Dr. Scott Kern novel buffers for DNA identification and that have changed the format of this molecular biology technique used to detect DNA. He's also elected the chair of Cancer Research Program, the Department of Defense Council, and serves on many international study sections, including being the chair of Tumor Biology and Genomics Study Section for the American Cancer Society, and a permanent member of the Cancer Prevention Study Section on the NCI Study Section panel. Thank you so much for being with us.
Liz, thank you so much for that great introduction, and thanks for the opportunity, you and Sarah, to take part in this weekend, which I think is incredibly powerful and important. I want to say just a quick shout out to Patty, coming from Jefferson, Philadelphia strong, the other P city that I care about, other than Portland. And really my interest and involvement in this panel is I've dedicated so far my life to studying cancer. And I'm involved in actually a company called Prothera, which does precision medicine, as long as my academic work, as well as what Liz had mentioned. I'm involved in a company that I co-founded and co-invented a novel conductive media, which could be used for identification of DNA. And all that stuff is good. We're really focused on predictive markers, but I would say in the cancer and the oncology field, where about a quarter of the population will die of cancer, sure, prevention is very important and better therapies are very important. But I would say that if we could actually have early detection in this disease, specifically the disease I study, which is pancreatic cancer, that's when we're really going to move the needle. Because only, for instance, for pancreatic cancer, only about 20% of people qualify for the only real curative intervention, which is surgery. And that's based on early detection. So if we can find early detection molecules or biomarkers or whatever it might be. And this has really stopped a number of companies, if you want to talk about innovation in companies as well as research programs, because it's so difficult to find. But if we could find that, that would make a difference. I would add, and I'm sure we would touch on it during this pandemic, that it seems like if we could actually have rapid testing and detect people earlier in a more sensitive way, who would be, infected with COVID-19, that could be I actually think personally that everyone's focused on vaccines. I don't think it would be unusual that a year from now that we're going to be talking about rapid early detection of COVID-19 in a way that we could go back to work or to concerts or to meetings like this. So I think this is an incredibly important topic, and I'm honored to be with my fellow panelists here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brody. All right, next we have Dr. Matt Hansen. He joined the Department of Emergency Medicine at OHSU in 2012. He received his bachelor's in economics from Brigham Young University and his MD from Case Western Reserve University. He also has a master's in clinical research from OHSU. His research interests focus on resuscitation and stabilization of ill and injured children in the pre-hospital and emergency department setting. Dr. Hansen is particularly interested in studying pediatric airway and respiratory management in the pre-hospital setting, which are critical components of resuscitation in many common pediatric emergencies, both medical and traumatic causes. In addition, Dr. Hansen is also the co-director of the Innovative Disruptive Emergency Applications for Emergency Medicine and the co-founder of ProMedics Incorporated. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think my sort of unique take is that, as an emergency physician, we're faced with patients that come in with symptoms and signs and not a clear diagnosis. And many emergency conditions, life-threatening conditions, are best served when they can be diagnosed very early and treated very early. And so part of our goal is to more accurately diagnose conditions early on that cause life-threatening emergencies such as sepsis and septic shock and other such conditions. So have the right treatment and help improve outcomes through early treatment. So that's a brief summary of my kind of unique take on early detection.
Great, thank you so much. And last, we have Dr. Shandi Dixon. She is an associate specialist at the Knight Cancer Institute Center for Early Detection Advanced Research. She holds a PhD in microbiology and immunology from the University of Michigan. Prior to her transition to CEDAR, she was an OHSU Fellow for Diversity and Inclusion in Research in the Microbiology and Immunology Department, and has served as an adjunct instructor at California State University, Los Angeles, and has led research projects in postdoctoral positions at the University of California, Irvine, and UCLA. After leading a project established in-house nanobody high affinity binding technology platform at CEDAR, she now supports molecular biology efforts on multiple cancer early detection projects and is leveraging her current position to advocate for support and inclusion of other inspiring scientists from low-income and underrepresented backgrounds. She founded the CEDAR Health Inequities Committee, which most recently established a reoccurring seminar at the Knight Cancer Institute to ensure that researchers are aware of impact health inequities and disparities that may be on early detection and treatment of cancers. Thanks so much for being with us. Oops, sorry, you're muted.
Oops, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, thanks.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's really an honor to be here with you all. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a different story, really, about myself and why I'm here and why this is so important to me. So for me, I grew up in poverty, and my family had no health insurance at all when I was growing up. I actually didn't have health insurance until I was in graduate school. So I'm a first generation college student. I was very lucky to even be able to get through school and get to graduate school. So I'm very thankful for that. But growing up, my family was never informed about cancer screenings, especially at the small doctor's office that we went to and traveled to only when we absolutely needed care. So we didn't know what cancer screenings were at all. So that was very difficult for us. And you see, I grew up with my mom and my grandparents. My mom was a single teen parent. And so I've always been a caretaker for them. When I returned after graduate school to California to be closer to my family, I got a call from my mom on New Year's Eve that my grandfather was very ill and that we needed to take him to the ER. And it was soon after that that we found out that he had stage 4 stomach cancer. And that was something we had no idea about at all. We were told many times at the doctor's office when he complained of having stomach issues to take some Roids, and that was about it. So I really know what it's like for struggling families and families in underserved and marginalized populations who don't get adequate health care. And so because of that, as a scientist now at Cedar, I work very, very hard to build awareness around health disparities and health inequities, especially for basic researchers and engineers. Cedar has a very unique setup where we have biologists and engineers working together to develop diagnostics, to develop new screening modalities, and hopefully therapeutics. But what's most important to me is that we make sure that when we do that, we make sure that those therapies and screenings are accessible, they're affordable, and they're inclusive. And I do all of this really for my grandfather and to make sure that other families don't have to suffer the way we did.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Shandy. Let's see, we're gonna go over to the chat, and it seems we have our first question from Jennifer Joe. And she asks, can you comment on what you see are the biggest issues surrounding early detection of COVID-19, especially in the ER or in the community? Let's see, Dr. Hansen, did you want to start out with that? That would be great.
Yeah, so I would say that the availability of rapid tests is still limited. So some hospitals have more than others. Where some, in general, though, the ability to do the rapid 1-hour PCR test is pretty limited. So a lot of places are still 24 hours or so out. So that it would be nice to make, it'd be nice for a higher volume of testing and more availability of rapid testing so we could sort of test everybody. I would say, secondly, we're at a time where people, I think, are not as, I think people are maybe getting tired of this and they might get sick and not be seeking to get tested as much as they could be or should be. And so that's another barrier, is to get people to get tested. And I think that varies widely regionally and by different areas. But I think more availability of rapid testing would be good. The antigen tests that are available are less accurate and less useful for the hospital, but there are rapid PCR tests available. We just don't quite have enough of them.
Would any of the other panelists like to jump in on this?
I'll add, Dr. Hansen is much more qualified than me, and also I'm not a virologist, I'm a molecular biologist. And I would say from that point of view, the only thing I would add is that, these qPCR tests that Dr. Hansen mentioned, it's all about sensitivity and specificity. So if there's a small viral load at the time or someone's at the beginning of the infection, we need to make sure that these tests are sensitive enough. And my concern is that someone gets a test on a Friday and they might have had that interaction on the Friday, but they wouldn't really actually be positive till that Sunday, and they go off and be with family members or their grandparents or other people. And then that's when they start the infection rate. So it's going to come down to, really smart people like Dr. Hansen and their colleagues on the clinical side to, as these tests become more available and we get more data, to figure out what is constituting a stamp of approval. And even if they are sensitive, someone could go out and have a compromising interaction that, you know, I worry that people feel like they get the negative test, they're fine. As well as the fact that was mentioned, I think there's a lot of data that's not really sure of how long does someone become immune once they've been infected. When is it safe for them to, you know, go and interact with other folks? So I guess, Dr. Hansen, the question to you is, I'm assuming, and this is, you know, you're in the trenches here. A lot of these questions we still don't know about, right? Is that correct? Is that the short answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rapid PCR tests are considered highly sensitive and specific for symptomatic patients, and so that we're doing pretty well with. I think asymptomatic patients are a little bit different, and I think they're reasonably sensitive and specific. And I think there's an intersection there between testing and public health, where people need to understand that you know, a negative test doesn't necessarily get them a free pass as far as public health goes, because if you got exposed 5 minutes ago, you're going to get tested now, you're going to be negative. So people need to be sensible, and no matter how good the test is, if there's no virus available to swab, you're not going to test positive. So, you know, there's this intersection, like I said, between public health and testing. I think, though, it's great to talk about all these things, but still the ability to test a lot of people is still just not where it should be. You know, we're still limited. Like ideally we'd be testing everybody that gets admitted to the hospital, and we're not able to do that. So because we just don't have enough rapid PCR tests, or even the non-rapid tests. We still don't have enough to test everybody.
Thanks so much for that. Let's see, we're going to go now to the team Heartology, and they ask, I think one of the biggest challenges for us is the deployment of our solution, especially in low technology communities. Any insights on navigating this would be really beneficial. Let's see, I don't know if maybe Patty or Dave want to start with that.
Sure, I'm happy to add a few comments. I don't know what specifically their technology is, but I can tell you one thing that we've done a couple of times with companies we've had in the past is find a partner who's already out in those areas that you need to go to, because, you know, as a startup, a small company, it's very hard to scale. You know, so for example, for us, one of our products, you know, we needed to reach really out. Even today with what we're doing, we have to reach out in kind of the second and third tier cities in India. And that's really who our target is for sickle cell and malaria. It's not necessarily the big cities. So we kind of found another company and some technology that was out there that was kind of similar to ours, going to the same places where they could kind of add in our solution. So we kind of got to ride on the back of their channels that they already had in place. And, you know, I think that doing that gives you an opportunity to scale and reach people much more quickly than trying to set those channels up yourself.
I'd add that looking at the problem of deploying technologies in low technology areas, or where you have other infrastructure challenges, that actually is the innovation. That's the need. When we were looking, for example, at continuous monitoring at home, a lot of technology companies kind of assume a pretty sophisticated data infrastructure, and it just doesn't exist. And so part of the innovation is coming up with a low power way to communicate data, or to, you know, address some of these, you know, connectivity issues. And so part of it is just, you know, accepting that, you know, closing that loop is the need, and then expanding your solution to encompass, you know, solving that need.
I'd like to add on to that, you know, just kind of from firsthand experience, living in a very low income, low technology area for most of my life, I would say that it's very important to involve community stakeholders from the inception of design of whatever it is, whatever your technology is that you're trying to develop for a particular community. It's really important to understand that community's needs. it can change from community to community. So bringing in those stakeholders very, very early in the design and asking the community kind of, are there language barriers? Do we need to have people that go out to leaders in the community to talk to them about the research, about the science, so that they can explain it to people in the community? Because that's how you're actually going to get people to either enroll in a clinical trial or even actually use whatever that technology is. That's extremely important. And also consider the possibility of using telemedicine and mobile health for whatever that is. If there's a way for you to reach that community through telemedicine rather than having people from the community come into a clinic, that's also going to allow you to reach a larger population of people as well. And making sure that your message is inclusive in terms of languages as well. That's also going to be very important.
So I would add, I think Dr. Dixon brings up fantastic points, because I think whether it's clinical trials or we do these early detection strategies, we don't hit some of these lower income communities, and it's a real shame. And I was involved in a couple of projects where, in fact, we were monitoring weight control as an early detection marker for cancer. And it turns out that some people, they didn't have scales. So what do? You got to get innovative. And part of the research plan in the grant is let's send scales to these folks. But that may not be enough. I think Dr. Dixon brings up a fantastic point, is getting community people engaged, setting up workshops, going obviously in pre or post COVID times, going there and actually showing them this is how we monitor it. Maybe even sending out Apple Watches where they can monitor that and do that is something that provides them. You can't just give it to folks. You actually have to educate them and sort of understand what the need is. So I'm just highlighting what Dr. Dixon brought up, and thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you, Dr. Brody. Actually, if the person that submitted the request from Heartology, if they wanted to ask any follow-ups, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. I think we have the space to have a little bit more of an organic conversation. So if there's anything that you wanted to follow up, you can feel free.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate it. And I think all your comments and inputs are just so valuable in kind of thinking through this. So I'll just give you a quick kind of like less than 30 seconds of what we're really doing. So essentially, we're developing an algorithm to predict heart failure a few days prior, using data from wearable devices and using subjective data in terms of, chest pain or shortness of breath or swelling in the leg and so on. It's essentially a survey that goes on with the data from the wearables, and you are using all of those data streams to actually predict the probability of heart failure a few days prior. And, the challenge for us is this, which is, how do you deploy something like this, right? So essentially, one challenge from a technology perspective is easy because wearables are out there already, right? But thinking about communities that do not have access to technologies like wearable devices, or that do not have access to continuous monitors at home, how do you try reaching out to that population that really needs a technology like this, right? But I think your inputs definitely helped, and I think Dr. Dixon, I think that was just fantastic, right? Like involving these folks in the design process, right? Like I think that's the holy grail of it, right? Because there are perhaps things that they're already doing that could support the solution and kind of come up with innovative ways. So I appreciate that, and I think Patty's comment about partnering up with folks that are already in the region that are out there doing the same thing, and you can essentially act on as a bolt-on solution. Definitely something we're looking for. So I appreciate all the comments. Thank you for that.
This is Dave. I think one of the challenges for technologies around early disease detection is, from the health economics perspective, both how large is the population that you're seeking to deploy an intervention, and then what's the intervention going to be? What's possible? And where does that fit in the healthcare economics of whoever the payer is, or whatever kind of healthcare system you're involved in? It's challenging just when you start to run the numbers to see, how big of a population you can monitor and either how frequent the adverse event has to be or how severe the economic consequences for, even fairly low cost interventions to start, being, a favorable return on investment from the payer's perspective. And it's an unfortunate truth, but just getting down to, of the available resources to spend, is this where it's going to be best used? You really have to find, populations that are fairly likely to need assistance, and then the intervention has to really make a difference. So it winds up being a pretty challenging innovation to make enough difference to get over that hurdle.
Thank you for that, Dave. We are going to move to Jennifer Joe again. She asks, since we have Dr. Brody's expertise here, what are the newest large impact biomarkers or new diagnostics in cancer, and how does this drive or not drive the developing cell and gene therapies?
Well, I'll talk briefly, but Dr. Dixon's work might be more relevant to, I think her research focuses on this, but I'll comment in relation to some of the stuff we do. I mean, I also think it's important as I'm just trying to do the motif of COVID. I think it's really interesting right now and could be innovative. I think there's a lot of people who are not getting medical care. And I've actually spoken to one of my colleagues in South Dakota who I trained with back in Baltimore, and he told me that he's a radiation oncologist, that it's amazing how many people just have avoided coming in and are missing early, simple what we have now, early detection strategies. And so I would hope, and maybe some people on this event-a-thon would be inspired, there might be a way through, again, keep referring to Dr. Dixon's point, but she brought up telehealth. I think that's a way in which that we could, get people in as far as the simple stuff is concerned. A big picture in my field, I'll just talk pancreatic cancer, and then I'll punt it to you, Dr. Dixon. Sorry, because I feel like you're the early detection person here. In my world, basically what they're trying to do is subtype cancers up front, especially pancreatic cancers, to see what therapies would work best. We try to do personalized therapy. We did just published a paper in Lancet Oncology that showed patients who actually had molecular profiles that matched a specific targeted therapy did about a year better than ones who didn't and who went on those therapies. That typically right now for us is there's a set of DNA repair genes that are defective in about 15% of pancreatic cancer patients. And those patients seem to be, respond very well to things like PARP inhibitors or platinum-based therapies. So the short answer is we're kind of looking over the edge on it as far as how it's going to impact therapy. But as far as like the real early detection strategies, that's just when I hand the mic to you, Dr. Dixon.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. No, at Cedar, I mean, that's our focus is, cancer early detection. So we have many project teams working on many different focuses. Some of our main focuses is lung cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. There's a few others, but I won't start listing biomarkers, but what I will say that is very important to make sure that as we do identify biomarkers, we need to understand where that data is coming from. And again, this goes back, and I'm going to push the inclusion again, because there was a paper that came out in 2018 talking about our reference genome and where we get most of our data from. And that unfortunately is a very Caucasian reference genome. And we're actually missing about 10% of the genome that could be found in Black and other people of color. So we're missing a large set of the possibilities of biomarkers that are out there, but that's because, we base most of our studies on what we have, what that low-hanging fruit is. And when you think about clinical trials, who's able to make their way to a large university hospital and actually be enrolled in clinical trials. And so what I would say needs to happen is for us to find a way to go back and really tie our knowledge to our responsibility. And what I mean by that is, it's one thing to be able to develop high-tech assays, diagnostics, but we have a responsibility as researchers and clinicians to make sure that the work we do actually benefits everyone. And that means a couple of things. That means building trust in the communities that we hope to help and building long-standing relationships, not just one-offs, so that we can actually start enrolling those people in clinical trials and building our data set, building on that reference genome so that when we do identify biomarkers and when we do look to precision medicine, that's also something very big at OHSU, is focusing on precision medicine, that when we say that, who is that precision medicine for? Is that precise for every single population? And that's the goal. We hope that it will be, because we have enough data and enough knowledge to say that based on this population, this makes sense, this therapy makes sense, or this biomarker is in line with what we've seen with the data. But without that data, we can't make real inferences from there. So that's one of the things I just really want to strongly push.
Oh, Liz, you're on mute. Sorry. While you unmute, I just want to add that this is a really important point. And when pancreatic cancer is concerned, it's amazing to me, Dr. Dixon, that I'm involved. I helped facilitate a study that, we've sequenced hundreds of pancreatic genomes in patients. And just this year, what started was a funded grant to actually sequence African-American patients with pancreatic cancer just this year in 2020. And it's interesting, that's led by Johns Hopkins, who initially, you may or may not know, was involved in the Henrietta Lacks, the HeLa cell story that came out. And, I think it's great that they're pioneering and they're taking the lead on it. But I think it's incredible that they've had to, and hopefully OHSU will be part of this, but we're going to include multiple institutions, because it's so hard to capture these patients that have been IRB consented. And that's a whole other issue that I know you could probably talk about, but consented for these studies. So, that's a whole issue here. If people are thinking about setting these technologies and other things up, you have to be very careful how you IRB consent people, and you have to make sure that people truly understand, English may not be their first language, et cetera, et cetera. So just using that opportunity to bring up that point.
Absolutely. I would just add on to that with consent and IRBs, especially for people who are interested in working with tribal populations. There's a big need to develop trust there and establish that beforehand. But tribal populations are sovereign nations, and they also have their own IRB. So any research project that wants to be established actually needs to go to the Indian Health Board and have it reviewed by them first before moving forward and submitting that to the NIH. It really needs to be evaluated by their health board first. So that was a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Dr. Brody.
Great. I'm going to move on now to Kevin from the team Memorable. Kevin, if you would like to unmute and ask your question directly, you may, or if not, I can read the question you wrote.
Yeah, wonderful. I can do that. I'm just curious, when you're kind of identifying your beachhead market, or the most the population that you think is going to benefit the most from this, some sort of screen. We're kind of wavering between two groups right now, and I'm just wondering, what are some of your deciding factors so that you're not kind of just like trying to spread yourself too thin?
Great. Patty, did you want to start with that, or?
I can start with a couple of things that might be helpful. I mean, first of all, just going back to even what Dr. Dixon said, I mean, really understanding the needs of that group. You want to go to where you're going to be bringing something that's really a must, not kind of a nice to have, but a real need. You're really serving them in a way that's very important to that group, and is what you're bringing, your competitive advantage or your angle on it, really going to be the biggest benefit to that group. So, I kind of start with the basis of what you're trying to do. For us, for example, we knew that if we had to do a product that could be used in countries in Africa and out in India, we had to have a cost that was going to be, below $2 a test. So, we really we knew we could do that. That was our advantage, was cost and speed. So we really focused on that group being, our initial place to go. The second thing, of course, is kind of looking at economics. Unfortunately, healthcare does come down to economics in many cases, and figuring out, going towards a group where there is a pathway that you can get it to them economically, whether they can afford it themselves or whether they have a stakeholder that's helping get the technology there. I think really looking at that economic pathway and really understanding, where, your first one wants to be the group that's got the highest need, that has a way to have it be paid for. And, it really plays into the advantage of your technology, what you're bringing. So those are kind of three of the things that I would look at very carefully in making that decision.
Great. Thank you so much, Patty. Dave, I was wondering if you wanted to weigh in on that. You gave a lot of really great insight during your workshop earlier today of the different pinch points in decision-making processes and innovation. If you wanted to expound upon that, would be great.
Well, it's challenging, choosing between good segments, attractive opportunities. And depending on where you're at in, a development cycle, finding something that can, establish a proof point and credibility, it may not be in the long run the most impactful segment to go after, but if you can prove that it works, prove that it makes sense, have a minimally viable product where the investment is reasonable, that might be the right path, because that will give you the foundation that you can then go after some more important segments in the long run.
Great, thank you, Dave. Let's see. Next, I'm gonna call out. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please, Matt. Please go.
One thing I think, Dave mentioned this minimum viable product thing, and I don't know your technology, but often our very early stage technologies are not perfect. And so, kind of thinking about what Patty said is if you can find the group that will tolerate your imperfect product and they still really want it, then you may have hit the right space. And it may not be the highest impact market at the end, but if they're willing to take it on and really want it, then you can prove your concept and take advantage of not having a really perfect technology with its hiccups that are going to come along.
Can I add one thing to that? Just following along with what you said, I would also add that, doing an assessment of the infrastructure of that population, it's one thing that there's a need. And that you have maybe a great technology and that they're, interested, but making sure that they actually have the capability to use it. So if this is something that requires internet access, if this requires a cell phone, making sure that this particular population actually has access to that, and that it's not just a few in the population that, might be a little bit more affluent or privileged, but that everyone in that population would be able to use that particular design, and thinking about that if you really want to get it off the ground. Otherwise, it might need to be manipulated so that it can be accessible in some way. But that might not be a bad thing. That might actually pivot your design in a way that makes it actually more broadly inclusive.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, if I could add one more thing, just building on what Dr. Dixon said. So really the idea too of when you're out there and really researching the needs of that group, you may figure out by looking at them, how do they access things today? What works well? Can you build on something they already do? We went out and obviously we had a diagnostic device that needed power somehow. And what we found when we were out in these locations, they have terrible power. It goes off and on, and has poor quality power. But what we figured out was that, even out in this smallest village out in India, they would find out a way of how to charge their cell phones, because they survive based on, that's how they do their financial transactions, or they just get by. So we ended up developing the way that our product could be charged off of cell phone chargers, because that's what we found in that environment. So I think, you know, really looking at how do they solve the problems today and how can you build on that can really help a lot.
Great, thank you for that, Patty. That's a really interesting story. I'm going to go next to Carlo from Team Cancern. Yes, or actually, Carlo, if you're here, you more than welcome to unmute and ask the panel.
Yeah, thank you. So we're just focusing a bit more on early screening for folks that are in remission for hematological malignancies as opposed to prior to ever having cancer. And just wondering what y'all's thoughts are on unmet needs for that specific use case of screening vigilance when you kind of already know what to be looking out for already.
Shandi, do you want to start with that, or?
I could try to tackle that one. So in terms of screening, when you already know sort of what you're looking for, that gives you definitely a leg up. It's not sort of a fishing expedition, kind of looking for something new. You already know what that is. I think what's important there is making it very clear to the patients what it is you're screening for, what result that means if you find something, and also what is going to happen next. Being just very, very clear in that process. It's one thing to have something that you can look for, but when you do find it, what does it mean for the patient? And that's always, there's always a balance there of, you know, causing, you know, we try not to cause any harm. So making sure that when we do give a patient a result of something that we're looking for, that there's some kind of a follow-up, something that we can do, so that there's a balance to be played there. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. If you want to be a little bit, go on a little bit further with that, I can try to answer, or somebody else might want to jump in.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in. I mean, Carlo, I agree. Maybe you can engage with us a little bit more. But one piece of advice I would say to you, especially in my field, is I wouldn't narrow yourself to this, because many of these type of biomarker tests, a lot of people, when they talk about them, they might actually not only be, so when you just sort of say remission and you want to see patients come back, another way of thinking about it is not only that, but potentially for people to monitor therapy. It might be more sensitive. There's a lot of limitations to the standard imaging therapies that are out there. And you might want to open up to that, as well as saying, hey, another deliverable here might be early detection. So I wouldn't, especially in the spirit of the Inventathon, I would think more broadly, if you could, and say, okay, yeah, we're going to focus on remission. That's going to be our start. But you know what? This actually might have implications for just sensitivity for monitoring of therapies, as well as early detection.
No, I think that does kind of answer that we can bleed into the health economics of prognostics due to treatment from like a stratification standpoint, where there's a bit more interest from the payer stakeholders to manage that a bit more effectively, to stop treatments that aren't working as eloquently.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
It's a huge thing. I mean, because you think about it from a payer standpoint as well as the patient standpoint, that if someone's staying on therapy even a month longer or 2 weeks longer than they need to be, and you can actually shorten that time where they could pivot, you're not only going to save insurance, the hospital, the patient. I think that's a great sort of potential marketing strategy.
Thank you so much.
I think Dave's trying to talk, but you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. A good analogy is compliance monitoring. And if you look at some of the, especially health economic research and modeling that's been done around compliance monitoring devices, be it CPAP or medication adherence, compliance, you'll see a lot of the benefit that you're going to see, you know, as just explained clinically. You'll see the financials that make sense for payers. And so that's a pretty compelling story financially.
I think one of the low-hanging fruit is that somebody else mentioned the lack of research that's available in certain diverse populations that aren't represented with classic biomarkers incidents. So this can at least showcase that there might be a way to do personalized prognostics when there's a lack of evidence specifically for those subpopulations. So I think we're just trying to figure out how to tie that into our messaging to make it a bit clearer, as opposed to just focusing on that economic pursuit from the payer perspective, trying to meet it halfway. And I think that's where we're struggling right now.
Well, I think that's a struggle. I think it's an important point because, you know, even for what I talked about, so, you know, forget about the, you know, even including the diversity factor and the fact that there's different, as Dr. Dixon mentioned, there's different populations that might respond differently, have different genetic backgrounds, et cetera. It's even within that, you know, that when you tell a pharmaceutical company that 50,000 people get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer every year, but only 10% or 5% of them might respond to this therapy, it's hard to get industry excited about that because the deliverable there isn't high. But if you're one of those 5 to 10%, or it's a family member, you care, you want that therapy. So, you know, I hear your struggle, Carlo. I don't have an answer for it. But I would say that I think it's really important to move that forward. And my thought would be is this is how you make a difference in these types of diseases, is if you do, it goes right back to Dr. Dixon's point. You need to personalize, personalize it, if you will, to really make a difference. And if we started doing that 5 years ago, we'd be further ahead. That's just my editorial opinion.
I would just add, you know, and that's exactly right, Dr. Brody. And I would just add that, you know, one thing I always think about is that, you know, the life of one is really dependent on the life of us all. And so, you know, it makes a lot of sense, even if it's something rare. I mean, that's still, you know, in the entire population, it seems like a small percentage, but making sure that we're all healthy and we're all well and focusing on those rare diseases is still very, very important. And so, it goes right back to personalized medicine and making sure that we have answers for everyone.
Thank you, everyone, so much for your insights and musings.
Great, thank you, Carla. So if there's any other people that haven't asked any questions yet, feel free to maybe use the raise your hand function on the top of your screen. If you want to just raise your hand, I can call on you and you can unmute. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask.
I mean, with the few minutes for the panelists, I'll bring up, I mean, I think one of the issues with big tech now, and as far as people on this thing is concerned, is viewing the population as just, you know, analytics. And I think moving forward with what's happening in the country, hopefully, and some of the things that are being heard, is I think if you start a company based on the premise that we care about every person and we're not just cared about what the population is that's going to make us money, I think there's going to be some legs to that. I'm not a business person, but my opinion is that I think if people implement that into their plans as they move forward and they sort of think about, you know, some of the concepts that were brought up here about considering everyone, not just the population that's just at need, but also a population that may not get that need first. So, you know, vaccines are going to come out and other things. Who's going to get that vaccine first? You know, or is everyone going to get the same treatment? Again, I'm not being political here, but is everyone going to get the same treatment as our president did when they get COVID-19? These are the type of things that I think when you think about setting up your company now that I think is going to benefit you in the long run, much the way people could be thinking about climate change, et cetera.
Absolutely.
I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that, but
I was going to say maybe we could just go around the panel one time and have any other closing remarks or last thoughts that you'd like to give to the rest of the participants. Dr. Dixon, was there any other final thoughts maybe you'd like to give to the hackers today?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to add onto that and say I agree 100%. We really do need to, you know, yeah, it's important. I understand the economics are important, but at the same time, you know, we all are part of our entire ecosystem. You know, we are, you know, we might think sometimes we're at the top of the food chain, but, you know, we're also guests on this earth, and we need to take care of everyone. And you know, so I think it's very important that we consider making sure that those people from marginalized and underserved populations also have adequate health care. They're included in clinical trials. We make sure that the data that we collect is true and is accurate and is really relevant for us to make, you know, very conclusive decisions about diagnostics and therapies. You know, it just, for me, what I do as a scientist now, it really is built on kind of a moral duty to really make sure that everything I do is going to benefit everyone. And so I would say, you know, just dig deep. We've got some great answers. We've got some great people that are here who are amazing scientists and amazing engineers and thinkers. So we can put our heads together and really make this a better place for everyone.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Hansen, do you have any final thoughts or closing remarks for the group?
I guess I think, you know, from my perspective, a lot of when people say early detection, I think their brains automatically go to cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've illustrated here that there are other opportunities that are important for, you know, in the underserved world to diagnose infectious diseases, or in emergency care situations, you know, even to identify a trauma patient who's in immediate need of some type of procedure to save them from bleeding to death. There's a wide spectrum of early detection that is worth thinking about.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dave, final thoughts?
I'd just throw in there, you know, focusing on the, you know, early detection without thinking through the consequences of that detection, the benefits of that detection, is, you know, missing the connection that you need to follow. Detection, you know, for the sake of detection isn't going to make sense. Or, you know, there's probably a lot greater opportunity if you know, can connect the dots on detection is necessary for this improvement of outcomes. So even if it's not part of your solution, enabling somebody else's intervention is a big part of the solution.
Thank you so much. Okay, we are going to end our session with Patty. Closing statements, final thoughts?
Sure. I think one of the things that COVID's probably taught us is that we do have a global technology world, a global healthcare world. And, you know, we started the company recognizing there's about 3 billion people out there that don't have access to the clinicians that we have here, to the medical technology, to the tools. And that if we're going to have a world that's really safe, we have to think about those other parts of the world too. And, you know, for all the technology that's out there, I mean, think of all the things and the way our lives have changed in the last 15, 20 years from technology. Very much of the medical technology is just the same thing you see over and over again. And I'm talking more about the hardware world and the world that we live in. And yet what I really think is people, you know, this is a great opportunity to take advantage of scalable technology that's out there and make solutions that also address the 3 billion people out there that need things and need them to have them be affordable and easy to use and, you know, easy to communicate with, all those things that could be used by an entry-level healthcare worker. It's a huge opportunity. It's really, really big.
Absolutely.
So that's what I hope. I mean, we're out there now. We've launched our product and we're seeing the kind of, you know, it's early, but it's exciting to see the pickup that we're getting and the excitement. So I just think there's a big market out there. And those of you who are innovators, it's a great opportunity for you to go after it.
Fantastic. Everyone, I want to thank you so much. I think this was just such a great discussion. Thank you, panelists. Participants, if you look in the chat, there is a post from Natalie for a questionnaire, if you wouldn't mind completing that. And I am very excited to listen to some practice pitches this evening. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care.
Good luck.